debunking the top 10 retention-based practice myths, costing you influence, happiness, and freedom. So we're going to get into this today. I'm excited to do that. This is really the bread and butter at Life by Design, if you will. This is, the content and the direction we've been going for almost 10 years. And I'm going to break down some of what we've seen over the course of those years, the last decade, really, and hundreds of examples from doctors that we've worked with and offices that we've worked with, and some of the challenges that they face in practice in building retention. And it's interesting, there are so many myths that are restricting people's growth. And as I went through the material and put this together, it really just hit home as I think back to all the different stories and cases that have had breakthroughs in some of these areas. There'll be some myths that are going to really strike you, probably between the eyes in some cases. Hopefully we tackle some things that you didn't know, and that's where a lot of the growth is going to come from. So why retention? I want you to understand that when I talk about retention, it's not as if marketing and sales or conversion is not important, but they are distinct and separate components. That said, there's a thread that runs through all of them. And many actually of the myths are simply misunderstanding the construct of how retention happens. So, why do we want to build a retention-based practice? There's no question that having new patients is important, and nobody's debating that. There's no question that having great conversion and day one process is valuable. We talked about this on the recent day one, day two webinar. But let me give you an example. And I think the example is going to help us grasp this idea. Now, as we go through this today, before I get into the example, again, I want to make sure that we're impacting you. I want to make sure that you're confident in the material that you get today. I want to make sure where you were confused, there's clarity. And I want to unlock the potential of your practice for your patients and for yourself. Number two, I'm going to sell you something. I thought about this when I was putting it together, and that's the best part of this. It's the same process that you're going through with your patients. And if you're struggling and challenged by thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want them to feel like I'm selling something, that's part of the problem. Is there needs to be authenticity, and you need to be upfront that you have something that can help these people, and it can be a massive win-win. And when you do that and you create that, and that agreement is built with that concept, then you're going to have retention in your practice. People want you to sell them something that is going to help them. Now, whether you buy what I'm selling you today, it doesn't really matter to me, because the content is beyond valuable, and I already know that what I'm going to offer you is also beyond valuable. For those people who see that and they want to take that step, that's great. Actually, I already see people on the webinar today who are coming to what it is that I'm going to be selling you, which is training camp. And I want to tell you that my job today is I want to compel you to be at training camp with us. That is really, the second part of my agenda. But of course, if you get nothing out of today, then you're not coming to camp. And that's really what it comes down to. So that's my job, to make sure that you get something out of camp or something out of today. Now, what I need from you guys is to implement. So of the 10 things I'm going to give you today, I've structured the webinar so you can implement an action step for each. You're probably not going to be able to implement all 10, and that's completely fine. But even if you implement one or two, that would be absolutely fantastic. All right, so that's the deal. Now, for those who don't know me, let's get into this really quick and briefly. I think most people know who I am. The reason retention has been our bread and butter is for really the bulk of it. It's simply that I failed at generating new patients. And that's what happened, is I was just not good at generating new patients. I did not do a good job generating new patients. I really struggled. Had no idea what I was doing, had no idea what marketing was, but the one thing I was really good at was communicating. And it took time, and there was a lot of development, not to say that I had it on day one, but I was passionate about chiropractic. And what happened in failing with building new patients was that I had to get really good at the very few that I had. And so that's what led us to this point. And for those who don't know me, I am Dr. Jamie Richards, and I am the CEO of Life by Design. You see here on the screen our Life by Design Center. again, it's really what I think is in many ways the pinnacle of what, not just the Life by Design vision, but this third paradigm chiropractic model and how it can be presented in a super high-end, professional, authentic, extremely profitable model. And not to say that you have to have this. In fact, I usually encourage people not to do anything like this, just to say that whatever you create in your community, in your business, we're going to be able to help you get there and have it look the way you want it to look for you. So now you know who I am. Let's make sure my screen actually goes to the next screen. Great. So let me go over that example. Why is retention important? If I put this on the screen, most people think to themselves, I would like to have 20 new patients, not 10. All right. And that is, most people, I would love to have 20 new patients. But then you start to get into the details of this and ask yourself, okay, well, are all 20 new patients the same? No. If you have 20 new patients, but your conversion is moderate and your retention is moderate, that's very different than you have, let's say, 10 new patients and you have a reasonable conversion, which I would consider 80%. And then I would say average retention that is possible for people if they go through the proper training could be upwards of 90%. I know that sounds extreme, but we see it all the time. So I'll give you an example. This is a great statistic for you and a way to audit your existing practice. Think about your growth over the last, let's say year or even 5 years for that matter. You should have 2 to 3 visit per week growth per month for every 10 new patients in your practice. So think about that. If you have 10 new patients this month and you convert at 80% and you retain 90%, you should see a continual 2 to 3 visit per week growth per month until you hit a cap, which is either a cap due to lack of energy, or it's a cap due to just there's not enough space, or you have tapped out on your volume in terms of number of scheduled appointments for the time that you want to work. So that means if you have 10 new patients a month on average, over the course of 12 months, you should have 2 to 3 per week per month, meaning your practice growth should be 40 to 60 visits per week. So if you're seeing 100 patients this week, 12 months from now, if you have 10 new patients a month and you do everything we said and you're at 80, 90%, you should be at 140 to 160 visits and so on and so on. At 20 new patients, if you only reduce the conversion and by 10% and the retention by 20, so let's say 70 and 70, you convert 70%, you retain 70%. Within 2 recommended care cycles, you will be at the same volume growth. And then eventually the 20 new patients will grow less than the 10 new patients. And all we had was a 10% difference in acceptance and a 20% difference in retention. And my point, and this is extremely important, is yes, you need new patients, but for very minor increases in retention and minor increases in conversion, you can have the same growth in your practice, assuming, of course, that people are actually completing these phases, and we'll talk about completion rates. Yet the 20 new patients cost you so much time, so much staffing, whatever marketing expense, let's not forget that. And I think the one that goes overlooked is the emotional health. What happens when you have 20 new patients and you only accept 14, and of those 14, let's say 60% complete corrective care, and you wonder, well, where's Bill? Where's Susan? Why do they not come back? And that starts to take a massive toll on you, especially when you worked really, really hard to get those 20 new patients. So my point is that retention is extremely important. I would say it is in many ways more important than new cases, as long as you meet the bare bones minimum of new cases that you need in your practice. Obviously, if you're getting 0 new cases or 2 or 3 new cases, that's a primary focus. But if you're already getting 10 new patients a month or more, for most of us, the primary focus needs to be on conversion and retention. And today we're going to focus on retention. So let's talk about some of these myths. Number 1, you might be asking yourself, can I do it? Yes, of course, lots of people have done it. Brian and Taya, Shauna, on and on and on. I won't talk a lot about these. I want to get into the myths. So let's talk about number 1. I already have a retention-based practice. This is one of the most common ones that I hear on a regular basis, is people saying, well, I already have a retention-based practice. Well, what makes them think that they have a retention-based practice? Well, I mean, if they look at their actual, data, they would realize they don't have one, but they feel like they have one, right? You ask a chiropractor, how many patients are you seeing a week? Oh, I think I'm seeing, 150 or 200 or 250. How many patients are you retaining, or what's your conversion and retention percentage? Well, I think it's probably about 80 or 90%. But as I said, if it's 80 or 90% and you're not growing at 2 to 3 visits per week per month for every 10 new patients, then you don't have a retention-based practice. So that's the problem number one, is that you think you do, but you don't. And so the action step here is really figuring out exactly, what it is you do have. And this is where statistics are very, very important. I'm going to give you one sneaky stat that goes missed a lot of the times. And that sneaky stat is a completion rate. This is one that even in the success surveillance system, which we love this tool, even in the success surveillance system, it's not in there. And so one of the things you can do right now or over the course of the next day or two is take your last 100 new patients, all right, and go back. If you are recommending, let's say 12 weeks of care, go back 12 weeks and pick your 100 from before that and go back and say how many of these 100 actually completed whatever was recommended to them. And out of 100, if it's 50 or 60, that means your completion rate is 50 or 60%. That means 30 or 40% didn't even finish whatever the recommended amount was. So this is one really, really valuable stat that can give you some massive insight into whether you do or do not have a retention-based practice. So don't just go on the stats that you think. Make sure you have the data and you have the stats. So what makes up a successful retention-based practice, retention-based practice system? Well, this is ours over the last couple years. This is our conversion percentage. 91, 97. Now, again, these are early on at the startup of the Life by Design Center, and they've progressively decreased as the number of new patients have increased to the point where we average about 80 to 85% conversion. And you can see our annuals as we go along, extremely high annual reacceptance into care. Now, these aren't the standards. Standards for me are if you can get 80% conversion and 90% year to year to year, or care plan, or phase to phase to phase, that's going to be fantastic. So myth number 2, retention starts on day 1. Well, that's not true. Retention doesn't start on day 1, right? Retention starts with your marketing. So consider this, consider your brand positioning. If you have positioned yourself as, a doctor that is taking on $27 cases, think about what that's doing by the time this person gets to you. Right? This person is already thinking to themselves, great, this is a cheap way to go and get my XYZ problem or condition fixed. And really, they're already pre-framed that, oh, well, this is a less expensive place to be. Maybe they're already thinking that it's not going to be as good as other places that cost more, but I can get in there, or I can afford this. And you're not asking them to really overcome a barrier. So what do you really need to do here is realize that retention starts the moment somebody becomes aware of you. So think about your brand positioning. What is it you're saying to people? What is your story? What is the narrative you're creating? And if you really don't believe this, go and look at different chiropractors. So let's say you've got some chiropractors in your area and they're running their $27 examination offer. I would suggest that you go and look at their reviews. And of course, they're going to have plenty of 5-star reviews. But if you dig in and look, at least in the experience I've had, you're going to start to see a lot more not 5-star reviews, 4s and 3s, and some kind of smattering of poor experiences, because what you're doing is you're making it easier for people who are less qualified to get into your practice. Now, do I think that there's a time and a place for an offer? Sure. I don't have an issue with that, but there's a way to create an offer that still speaks of value. But for your practice and your step, again, look at the 5-star reviews, look at the story you're telling, and think about your brand positioning. Prospects don't want lifetime care. Well, that's interesting, because my experience is that people brush their teeth forever. People get their hair cut generally forever. They mow their lawn forever. There's examples, and they're endless, on and on and on and on. You can see all kinds of them in lots of different areas. It really depends on where somebody is along the spectrum. You see, what a customer wants. This is not just specific to chiropractic. What a customer wants is they want value, they want outcomes, they want results, they want transformation, right? They want protection in their health. And again, it's really going to depend on where they are in their needs, but that's the job of a marketer, right? We talk about action steps in terms of building retention. I know this is a tough one because a lot of people don't want to do this. Now, you can do it or you can source it out, but you've got to be very careful about who you pick in terms of, oops, sorry guys, my screen went somewhere, disappeared on me. Okay, good. You guys can still probably see the screen. You've really got to think about, there we go. You really have to think about, what it is that you are gosh, sorry guys. Because I love Macs, but there's certain things about the Macs that just drive you crazy. And this is one of them when your screen jumps all over the place. All right. This is also one of the things you'll love about technology, is it's wonderful when it works. All right, guys. Hang in with me. I said that there was going to be a challenge somewhere along the way. We just hit it. So let's get there. No. I will get it. I promise you. All right. So I cannot see your comments, by the way, but you're going to see the slideshow. So the reality is, patients want lifetime care. They may not understand it's lifetime care. They may not understand that, they're going to see a chiropractor for the rest of their life. But if you craft a message that moves them along the path of needs until they see you as a solution, then they're going to come in more qualified and ready to stay longer. As I said on the other myth, people don't just, they don't just buy into lifetime care, but they also, don't they want something that's long term. And I see this in practice all the time. When you craft a message that moves them along the path, and you understand that building retention starts really, really early in the process, then your action step here is to really think about who my avatar is, knowing your market, developing copywriting skills. Again, I find that these are things that a lot of chiropractors don't want. They want retention, but they don't want to do this work that's going to get them there. Just get them started. This is one of my favorite ones. We hear this all the time, this idea of, day one, day two, just get them to start. And as long as they're there, then, we're going to be able to teach them and educate them. I would say, we want to go the other way here. We want to draw a line in the sand. You want to have better retention, then ask more of your patients. So if you're asking patients to follow through for 6 visits or 10 visits or 12 or 2 months or whatever it is, whatever your minimum standard is, you need to draw a line in the sand. Otherwise, you're making it acceptable for people to come and go as they want. And again, it's not to say that we're strong-arming people. It's not to say that there's force. But at the same time, you have to be the doctor. You've got to elevate your process and ask people to step into that process, not just get them started. So when you say, I have an 80% conversion rate, this is why the completion rate is such an important statistic. Anybody can get somebody to start chiropractic care. And if your statistic is, well, they started care, and so my conversion rate is 95%, well, look at the completion rate, and that's going to tell you a bunch about the type of patients you're getting and essentially what they see your care to be. So action step is draw that line in the sand, okay? Next, need to make it affordable. Oh, this is a big one in chiropractic, right? We end up projecting our value of our care to our market. And whether it's you as a newer doc or whether it is, just if you're not valuing the process, if you don't value what you do and you naturally think, I need to lower my fees, it's too expensive. Listen to these words. It is not your job to make chiropractic affordable. Hear me again. It is not your job to make chiropractic affordable. It is your job to make it valuable. I can't stress this enough. There is a psychology that comes along with stepping over a financial barrier. You've probably even heard the terminology, when you pay attention. You have to create value for people and then charge according to the value that the market will bear. Now, there's some simple ways to think about this. So if you have, your current fees and you notice that your conversion rates are really good, your completion rates are really good, and your retention rates are good, and you have adequate number of new cases, well, then that tells you that you are creating enough value that there is no market resistance, right? People are not saying no. And even if they are saying no, that doesn't mean right away that it's a fee issue. It often means that it's a communication issue or a value issue. You're not creating a value gap that's high enough for people to see your fee as an exchange for what they're going to get. So your job in this process, the action step here, is to really think about the process, right? And how you can make this process better, how you can make this process more valuable. One of the things we do a lot is, doing the $1,000 visit example. What could we do to make our visit worth $1,000 and get your team brainstorming on this, get them involved in this as an action step? It's amazing what comes out of this. And you look around your practice in your office and you see all these things that make you think, geez, I couldn't have that if I was charging $1,000 a visit. And it's not to say you're going to charge $1,000 a visit, but that exercise alone is going to bring up all kinds of pieces that are going to, give you action steps that you can be taking. There's going to probably be 10, 20, 30 things right off the bat without even thinking about it that you can improve right away to make your care more valuable. And it's not the results. It's probably not even the things you're saying, although those are all going to come into play. It's probably a lot of the things around you, the way the phone is answered, where the person is sitting, what you say to them when they come in, all those other things that you would think of as little that are really significant. The next myth is they stay with you because they like you. And I mean, I'm definitely guilty of this for sure. Early in practice, self-esteem definitely was not developed. And I perceived it as just being easier than being confrontational. And, it's one of those things where I think a lot of chiropractors, they end up going down this path. Think about it. Think about how it feels when you develop, I'll put in air quotes, a friendship with somebody who starts in your practice and then they drop out. It feels crushing, right? It feels like they just stabbed you in the back because you felt like you were developing a friendship. And if you really dig in here, you were probably developing this friendship, and let's be truthful, not because you actually wanted to be friends, although that may be the case in some instances, but because you really thought this would be the way to keep them in your practice. And I only say this because I did this with way too many people in my early practices. Now think about the vice versa here, and the flip of this is, even if you want to become friends with somebody, you are friends with somebody, think about how it works when you have given them your best recommendations, right? You've had challenging and tough conversations with them, and you've continually made new agreements and had the table talk conversations over and over again. You gave them your best of your best of your best, and then they drop out. You're not emotionally crushed. I mean, they may be your friend, they may not be, but the fact is you knew that you did everything you can for them and you were fine with their decision. But when it's your friend or who you think is your friend, it's only going to act to negatively impact your self-esteem. So if you want somebody to get better results and stay longer, then here's the action step for this myth. And it's simple. It's be the doctor, right? Fred Barge, be the doctor. You need to lead people. You need to have the difficult conversations and move away from becoming, I would say over the time, 20 years in practice, I actually have a lot less friends from my practice than ever before. And it's not that I don't have people I like and I would be even willing to be friends with. It's that I understand that slippery slope, and the retention in my practice and getting people results and the success of our business is far more important than me getting more friends. Get the big idea, right? If we just get people to get the big idea, then that should be fine. They understand that the body is self-healing. They understand that, the body has requirements. Yes, the body's designed to be extraordinary. There's all these concepts and principles that make up the big idea. And I 100% believe that they are extremely important. How do we know that getting the big idea is a myth? How do we know that it's not the be all and end all and the answer? Well, because reality. How many people have you had in your practice that you focused on just teaching them the philosophy and focused on getting them the big idea and they left your practice? Happens all the time. Not suggesting this doesn't need to be there. It does. It needs to be an underlying component of retention, but add into that results. So let's talk about results here in terms of our action step on this myth. When I say results, I'm not talking about necessarily subjective results. I'm talking about to create a situation where you've put yourself in a winning position. So what do I mean by a winning position? Well, as an example, what I promise or guarantee people at day 2 is that, Mrs. Smith, I'm looking for 2 changes, and that will confirm that we've reached the end of your corrective care. One change is a change in your structure towards balanced, and a number 2 is a reduction in stress in your nervous system. So one, by having objective testing, and then secondarily, by making sure I'm clearly communicating what a win is for both of us, then I'm putting the emphasis on results, but those results are based on what I want them to be, and we know that we're going to be able to win this over and over and over again. Now, I also know that if we can create great results objectively, there's a really, really good chance that we are going to have a ton of subjective changes as well. And let's be honest, while you'll have a handful of people who maybe never had a subjective change in your practice and they really understand the importance of objective data, you wouldn't have much of a practice if nobody felt better. Nobody noticed physiological changes. The good news is, if you put your emphasis on the clinical aspect and really improving, what it is that you do, your clinical skills, the reverence for the correction, your analysis, then you're going to get subjective changes along with this as a secondary effect. One yes is enough. Again, subject to this for many, many years, even with Reggie Gold, and really kind of falling into Reggie's camp, this idea of sitting people down on day 2 and going through the questions. I did a podcast not long ago called The 3 Questions, I believe it was, or Reggie's 3 Questions. And this is what he would ask people. He didn't even have a day 2. It was just day 1. You sat down, you went over everything, probably took him an hour, and he got to these questions at the end. Hey, Mrs. Smith, if we open up all these channels and your headache goes away, should we leave these channels closed? Well, obviously not. We should open them up. If we open up all these channels and your headache doesn't go away, should we still leave them closed? Oh, well, I guess we should leave them open. People get that, but they really still want the headache to go away. And then number 3, which is how often or how long should we keep these channels closed in your kids? Well, you shouldn't. So these were Reggie's questions. He would get yeses. And then once he got yeses, he would come every day until you weren't subluxated. And then you would come every week for the rest of your life. And that was all basically agreed upon at the first visit. That's not enough. I don't think it was probably even enough then. There's reasons why it worked for Reggie. In part, his communication, in part, maybe a box on the wall. But again, that's not an equal exchange, and that's not a business model that I think anybody wants to mimic. You've got to get yeses over and over and over and over again. In fact, the more yeses you get, the more retention you're going to have. Not just logistically, obviously. It's like saying the more birthdays you have, the longer you're going to live. Obviously, that's true. The more yeses you get, not just over time, but also in compressed time. So the more yeses I get on day 1, the more yeses I get on day 2, the more yeses I get at the table, the better it's going to be. And the more results I'm going to see with people staying longer and longer and longer. And I would even say the most important yes, if I had to narrow it down to one yes, for retention at least, and maybe not the most difficult yes, but the most important, is the end of corrective care, right? I mean, people in the initial stage at day 1, 2, not to say it's easy, and especially not easy to do it well, but most people are there because they want your help. And as long as you don't mess it up and you give them a, really what would be considered a logical or realistic expectation of what they need to do and what the outcomes are going to be, and you haven't priced yourself out of the market based on what you deliver, people are probably going to say yes at a really high rate. But it's at the end of corrective care when all the smoke and mirrors have disappeared, right? When none of that is there anymore, when people are thinking about, well, do I want to keep going? Do I not want to keep going? Do I feel better? Do I not feel better? This end of corrective care yes is one of the most important. And in terms of, an action step for that, I thought today that if you haven't heard the reverse authority play, this is from our sales playbook. I believe I also talk about it in the day 1-2 system. This is one of my favorite conversations to have with people. And so I'm going to share this with you because I think, again, I want to make sure you get tons and tons of value from today. We do cover this in much more depth at training camp and the psychology behind it, but let's talk about it right now. In the reverse authority play, we've come to the end of corrective care. And how many times have you sat down with somebody in the end of whatever your phase 1 is called, and you have that difficult conversation, which is, okay, well, things are good. Your test results look better. And I know out of experience, I kind of reached a point where the conversation sounded like, well, so what do you want to do? What do you want to do next? And that wasn't great for conversion, by the way. And I realized that I needed to have a more structured conversation there. But at the same time, I never wanted to feel like, I had this conversation earlier today with somebody as well. I never want to feel like I'm strong-arming somebody, not that we would do that. And I want them to really come to the conclusion that I would come to. And when that happens, not only does it make you feel light and excited that they came to that conclusion, but you really don't have to say much. They are telling you what they should do, and it's exactly what you want them to do. So it sounds something like this, and that's why I call it the reverse authority play. I talk about their test results, and obviously there's lots more to this visit. But we get to the end, and I'll say, okay, Bill, your next phase of care, I'm talking as if it's going to happen. Your next phase of care is the rebuilding phase. And in the rebuilding phase, we want to set your checkup frequency so you are shifted for very little time in between your visits. So you get checked, corrected. There's a drop off in terms of function, structure, position, whatever your language is. And then we're there relatively quickly after that to make a correction and continue up that path. So how many times a week have I been checking you? Well, twice. And how many times, and this is really this is the heart of the question. How many times have I never made a correction? Well, you've never not made a correction. Okay, great. So what does that tell you about how long we should space in between your visits? What would be the longest you would want to go? In fact, if you were the doctor, what do you think would be the most ideal frequency in the next phase of your care? Well, I wouldn't say any less than every week. Bill, that's a great idea. I agree with you 100%. Let's do this. Let's check you. And then I would go on to confirm what that agreement looked like. But the point is, I just taught them why we would do what we would do. And then I put them on the spot and let them be the doctor for a second and said, what is the most logical action step for you to do in this next phase? And you would be astonished as to how many people actually choose exactly what we want them to do. People leave and there's nothing you can do about it. It is true people leave, but it's not true that there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, leaving is the reality. You're not going to have 100% retention. And I'll talk about this in the next myth as well. And enough people have left in your practice that you just assume that they're going to leave and there's very little influence that you can have. But the reality here, guys, is that there is more influence. You can have tons and tons of influence on the decision people make. Why? Because you create the entire construct of your practice. You're creating your world in your practice, the space, who you're attracting, what narrative you're telling, what conversations you're having, what conversations you're not having. Every single piece of your practice is your choice and your decision. You are the master of your domain. And so understand, it's kind of like health as we teach it to our patients, and people assume because of genetics, there's really very little they can do, but that's not true. There's so much they can do. A large part of their health outcomes are primarily decided by what they do day in and day out. You get to do the same. So if you're seeing retention as a struggle, well, there's something you can do about it. Probably 20 or 30 or 100 things you can do about it. And so here's the action step. Step number 1, commit to excellence in every single way. I cannot reinforce this enough. It's something that I see that is not at the level that I would love it to be in practices. I think chiropractors can do so much better at this. It goes back to the $1,000 visit. It goes back to looking at the Extraordinary Chiropractor Report Card. There's 40 things in there across 10 categories. You could pick any of them where your score is under 7 and you could work on it. So audit the experience in your practice. Audit what it's like for a new patient. Audit what it's like to go through the first phase of care. Audit, the emails people get. Audit the experience they have and what it is they're saying as they go through your process. There's all kinds of things that you can do to influence whether people leave or not and how long they stay in your practice. Now, it leads us to really the last one, which is, the goal is 100% retention. I think the goal is extremely high retention, 100%, very, very high. But the myth here, and the reason this is a myth is we've been taught in chiropractic that we need to serve everybody. Everybody deserves chiropractic. And I would say that's true. People do deserve chiropractic, but you are not their chiropractor. You don't have to be their chiropractor. Nobody's forcing you to be their chiropractor, and you're not forcing them to be your patient. So, when you think about the reality here, the reality is that there's a portion of your practice right now that needs to be fired. There's probably a portion of my practice that needs to be fired. In fact, what we did, and I'll tell you the process as the action step, identify your best clients, the ones you love, their characteristics, their psychographics, their demographics, and use this as the avatar, right? As who you're trying to attract. You get to use it in your marketing and other components of your business, but then also make a list from this of people you want to fire. Seriously, make a list of the people you would like to fire. I'm not saying, do it tomorrow. And I'm not saying just go and fire them. There's a way to do this. And I'll tell you what I did. We made a list of all the people in our practice we wanted to fire. And I think it was 30 or 40 people in our practice that we wanted to fire for various different reasons. But what happened was once we identified them, it was amazing. I would even say kind of shocking how quickly they led themselves out the door. And it's not as if I did anything very specific. I didn't, tell them, that we wanted them to leave. I didn't treat them any different, right? I still gave them a great checkup. I still did my best with corrections. But what I did was I started treating them like I treat my best clients. I asked them to pay what people should pay. I asked them to show up on time. I asked them to make up missed visits. I asked them to come to workshops. And presto, they left because they didn't want to do those things because they weren't my ideal client. And just think about how my retention got better. So by firing people and recognizing that I don't need 100% of people to stay, and there's always going to be a certain percentage of people that are not the right fit, and consistently looking for those at the front end, right? And making sure they don't get into the funnel. I think that's a great action step. But if you do have many in there, then I would go through this process. Maybe more than anything, this could be extremely freeing for people if you haven't done this before. And so, we've got these retention myths that we talked about. Little hinges swing big doors. You hear these things and you think, they're, you may think some of these things are huge, and I do too. Some of them you may think are very little, but some of the littlest things can have the largest effects in your practice. So, we've covered a lot of things today. I obviously could talk for hours and hours and hours as I'm looking at the time thinking, man, I feel like I just got into some of these things. I think that if you just take one of these things and you implemented it, you would automatically have a competitive advantage over your competition. And let's be clear, other chiropractors in your market, other healthcare providers are competition. And that's not a bad thing. Competition is a good thing. So now you have two choices. As always, we give out tons of free content, and we will continue to do that. I'm confident if you just took the free content, you would be able to implement things and you would have results that you wouldn't get if you didn't have access to that content. But if you can go deeper, which is what training camp is, let me just say that training camp is the A to Z of Life by Design for chiropractors, packed into an intensive program immersion, especially if you're live. And we'll talk about the virtual options here today. And that's why I'm excited to make it available. We've never, ever done virtual before, ever. Part of it is the experience that I want chiropractors to have, to be next to them, to sit down and have dinner, to interact, to answer questions. So we've crafted a way to have a virtual stream. And my vision for this for the virtual side is that it's still an incredible, extraordinary experience. And what I want is I want this to be, I really want this to be something where you are elevated as the doctor. And I'm envisioning this streamed into your practice. So if you can just kind of close your eyes here, streaming into your practice, big screen TV, you've got comfy chairs, everybody's set up, your team's here, you've got food, you've got drinks, There's some homework assignments to get everybody ready, to get people on the same page, to get us ready so we know all the different people who are going to be at camp, either virtual or live. And then we're going to take you through the training. So we are going to do the heavy lifting. We're going to create a core product with you. And what I love about training camp is this. It is the #1 most reattended program that we've ever had. People have come to camp 3 and 4 times. And I think that speaks to what happens at training camp and how this really transforms a practice. And you think about a lifetime care value of one patient. I know in our practice, it's $2,500 to $4,000. So you're talking about one more new patient coming into your practice, not even, in fact, a quarter of that. And so we're going to create your core product. We're going to use all of the tools we have available to guide you through that or to optimize the core product that you've been developing. And you and your team are going to work on it together. And it's something that you're going to create together. We're going to go through the day 1, day 2 conversion system. So even if you have this program from before, even if you're a part of Life by Design already, the way we do it at camp is it's A to Z. We break down the psychology of day 1 and 2. We break down the agreements. We break down the conversations. We train on them. We break down every objection. And we go through all the frameworks and we give you all the paperwork, all the slide decks, everything that you're going to need to get a solid agreement on day 1 and day 2. And then we get into what I think is the retention-based, gem, which is the feedback cycles. Learning what those variables are, where they are, how to get people to say yes authentically of their own accord over and over and over and over again. Usually people are blown away, as I said, just even giving you a little taste of the reverse authority play and all the different constructs that we have in place. It almost feels like magic. It does. Like Dr. Steve, who's our associate, we often talk about, man, it almost seems like magic that people just tell us what it is that they want to do, and it's exactly what we want them to do, and they're happy and they're excited to do it. And we'll spend a lot of time on day 2 building a curriculum, digging into how to teach this curriculum, how to create multiple education streams in your practice, and to check all those 3 boxes. So training camp is an amazing experience. For those who've been there, it's our, as I said here jokingly, it's our gluten-free bread and butter, and it's been that for more than a decade. And I'm excited to make sure that you have a virtual stream, and we are having a live stream for any docs that are in Ontario. Again, wherever you listen to this, who knows what's happening in terms of restrictions, not restrictions. So again, you can check in with us to see what those are at any given time. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link up in a second. I'll let this slideshow keep going. You can click the link over. You have 1 hour. And right now, for being on the webinar, if you use the code 10, you'll see a 10% reduction. What I love about the virtual stream, guys, is that if you're doing virtual, it's your whole team. Your whole team can be there, right? If you're doing virtual, everybody can be there for the same price as one doc, and you can stream the whole team in, or we'll stream us into you, I should say, and we'll handle the training. You'll still have breakouts. You'll still handle lunch for your team. If you want to do dinners or any other team, training components, you can handle all those. But again, that's going to be up to you. We'll help you get that organized and structured. Guarantee, I'm going to guarantee it's going to be amazing. If it's not, I'll give you your money back. That's really no big deal to me. It's going to be amazing. It is every time. People come back over and over and over. And every time they come back, they say the same thing. I'm going to come back to the next camp. I'm going to come back to the next camp and the next camp. So what I'll do here is, if I can find the slideshow and I can get to the right place, I'm going to put this link up here for you guys. Let me just find it. There we go. So I'm going to put this on your screen. You should see this on your screen right now. So you have 1 hour. I'll leave this up. If there are any questions, I can see my chat now. You can pop those questions in, and I'll do my best to answer them. What I'll leave you with is this, as you're thinking about questions, as you're popping over to see whether training camp is going to be a good fit for you. Retention is the blue ocean. It really is. Yes, as we've uncovered and developed our marketing strategies and really built our practice up by creating a community, been great and wonderful, and our numbers and revenues have only exploded. But to be able to know that people who come through our practice are going to come and they're going to stay and they're going to have a great experience. I can't tell you how less stressful that is, especially when I get on the phone with doctors and I listen to what they're telling me and the struggles that they're going through and the challenges that they're going through. It's painful, and I know it is because I was there early and I figured it out because I had to. And if there's anything we can do to help you figure it out, we've already wrapped that up, and that's what training camp is. So guys, if there's no questions for today, I'd love for everybody to jump over, check out the link. You'll have until the next hour to go ahead and do that. You will get a replay link probably in the next 24 hours. So you'll be able to have this recording for as long as it's made available to go back and to listen to some of the challenges. And then, yeah, Steve, camp's going to be awesome, buddy. Steve is going to be attending live. If anybody wants to be here with Steve. Scott, actually, I know you're attending live as well, which is exciting, coming back again. And again, we'll see lots of that. The camp for virtual is actually starting to fill up, which I'm excited about. And we will start launching that next week. So we haven't actually launched that to our larger groups or lists and so on. I wanted to get through this webinar first and really present why retention is so important and what a drastic impact it has on practice when you really make it a centerpiece of what it is that you're focusing on. And again, we'll show you how to do that. It's what we do well. It's what we continue to do, and we'll do that for you guys, okay? So everything's there for you. I'll let this run for a bit. And guys, make it a great day, as always. And thank you so much for being a part of Life by Design and being a part of the community.